So I love computers, and I'm sure so do you. But when I think about computers, especially computer processors, one major company comes to mind, and that's Intel. But why not AMD? You know, that company that right now is taking away massive amounts of market share from Intel? What made them a major player back in the day? And how did they fall from grace? But most importantly, how were they able to come back, especially against the Goliath that is Intel? Well, it's an interesting story here at Techonomics. Hey, it's Carlos, always trying to provide you with insight on technology and how it's affecting you and the world at large. AMD has become a major player in the tech space, especially when it comes to CPUs. But to understand how they got here, we have to understand where they came from, both the good and the bad. So let's get some context. AMD was founded back in 1969. Yeah, they're that old, in Sunnyvale, California, which is basically Silicon Valley. Their products became some of the first microprocessors in personal computers. AMD ended up making a contract with Intel, allowing them to use Intel's architecture in their microprocessors. Seeing AMD's success, Intel refused to give them access to their new CPU architecture. And while there was eventually judicial recourse, Intel succeeded in hampering AMD at a critical time during a massive growth in the PC market. AMD, learning from their mistakes, ended up buying companies like NextGen in order to bolster their CPU development and rethink their processor architecture. This led to a peak for AMD as Intel was struggling at the time and couldn't really compete. As a result, AMD was really able to enjoy a nice sense of stability for a few years. But business is hard, and while there isn't one specific reason that caused it, AMD proceeded to fall from grace. So AMD's first major stumbling block was their processors. Back in 2006, Intel came out with a dual-core processor, which solidly left AMD in the dust because of its multiple cores. And while in the next year, AMD ended up coming up with an answer, it had a fatal bug resulting in the entire project being canceled. In that time that AMD was struggling, Intel came up with a solid performing quad-core processor in their Q6600. In 2008, AMD ended up coming out with their own quad-core processor with superior architecture. It failed. The supposedly superior architecture ended up being more expensive and notably inferior when it came to performance. It was a total flop. AMD's shortcomings were not only technological though, they also made some pretty bad financial decisions as well. They ended up buying ATI Technologies in order to produce graphics cards. Buying them cost AMD $1.1 billion, roughly half of AMD's valuation at the time. This ended up being a massive financial blunder. ATI Technologies, having no manufacturing sites and lackluster revenue, was extremely overvalued, resulting in AMD getting very little for their investment and losing tons of money. And to top it all off, in 2008 there was a market crash that ended up having a significant effect on their business. What came next was a decade of product cycles in both the CPU and GPU space with lackluster returns. Sure, they tried to innovate, but they were always behind the competition, Intel and Nvidia respectively. AMD was never the superior choice when it came to PC hardware. And because of this, they ended up having to make some massive moves. So the first big move AMD made was to hire two people that would be the foundation for the major innovations to come. First, they hired Jim Keller. This former lead architect returned after 13 years away from the company. He became in charge of spearheading research on ARM-based server processor designs and x86 processor designs. These are two different types of processor architectures. The second hire was Lisa Su. She became the Senior Vice President and General Manager. She's also credited with heading the move to push AMD beyond just personal computers. Specifically, she was integral in getting AMD CPUs adopted by the two major consoles, PlayStation and Xbox. As a result, Lisa Su ended up becoming CEO of AMD in 2014. 2 years later, AMD announced their new Zen CPU architecture for their Ryzen CPU product line. This new architecture used the 7nm process, which is half that of Intel's, allowing the chiplets on their processors to be much smaller. This change in the process also opened the door to allowing more cores to be on the CPU. While people did not see its value at the time, it ended up being an important part of AMD's growth because more cores allows for better performance on productivity tasks like video editing and streaming. What more, AMD continues to innovate, and as of recording this video in early 2021 with their 5000 series CPUs, AMD totally decimates Intel when it comes to multi-core performance and handedly beats them in most, if not all, single-core performance metrics as well. That said, Intel is still selling more CPUs, but it's not because of lack of demand. On the contrary, it's because AMD simply cannot produce enough because of the current shortages worldwide. But that's a topic for another video. That said, I assure you that AMD would be outselling Intel like crazy if they didn't have these production problems. But all of that is just about personal computer CPUs. When it comes to server CPUs, AMD produces products that have over twice the amount of cores as Intel server CPUs. They're not even competition anymore. Period. AMD had ups and downs like many companies do, but they did 3 things to come back and be where they are today. First, they hired good people that love what they do and are good at their job. Second, they focus on making great, innovative products and letting it speak for itself. Lastly, they took advantage of an opening in the market. If Intel had been on their A game this whole time, AMD would not have been able to blindside them like they have. But this just proves, regardless of industry, if you have a good team, a good product, and a good message, you can overcome any odds. Okay guys, thanks for watching another video. Please smash that like button if you can. It really helps with the algorithm. And you know what? Comment down below with your thoughts on what Intel can do to bring the fight back to AMD. Again, this is Carlos from Techonomics, over and out.